It was as if time had frozen. The light rain that began to fall seemed not to affect the stiff bodies of the people around the coffin. At midnight, the dark brown horse stood motionless like a statue, its muscles tense, its eyes locked on the open coffin. The muffled and fragile sound of crying continued to echo, a lament so human and yet so alien that it made Marianne's heart tighten in her chest. She took a hesitant step forward but stopped. Something about that sound seemed to touch a deep place in her soul, a place she didn't want to revisit. Hank, the gravedigger, looked at his trembling hands before daring to take another step. His thoughts were a mess. "I've buried more people than I can count," he muttered to himself, trying to summon courage. "Never seen anything like this, never." Each step he took toward the coffin seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. When he finally reached the side of the coffin, he stopped, took a deep breath, and leaned in to look one last time. What he saw made his blood run cold. "It can't be," he whispered, almost voiceless, his hand shut to his mouth, trying to stifle a scream. Inside, the creature moved slowly and shakily, like a newborn waking up for the first time. But it wasn't a baby. Its skin was pale and blotched, as if it had never felt the warmth of the sun. The eyes, large and deep, were fixed on the horse, and the small arms reached out in its direction, silently begging for something no one could understand. The smell coming from the coffin was damp and ancient, like a basement locked away for decades. The neigh of midnight broke the silence again, this time louder and more desperate. He stamped his hooves on the ground as if trying to scream for someone to do something. The connection between the horse and the creature was undeniable. Some of the people stepped back even further, whispering about curses and old stories of souls that couldn't rest in peace. "We shouldn't have brought this horse here," a man said, his voice trembling. "He knows something we don't." Marianne, finally breaking the trance, stepped forward. "This isn't right. There's something Earl never told us," she said, more to herself than to the others. But before she could continue, the creature inside the coffin began to cry louder, its voice turning into a high-pitched, piercing sound that made the air vibrate. The rain intensified, soaking everyone, but no one moved. Midnight, now completely drenched, lowered his head, and a tear slid down his face. It was impossible to deny that this horse, in some way, knew what was happening. But what did that mean? The torrential rain felt like a forewarning of something bigger as everyone waited, terrified, to see what would happen next. Are you enjoying the story? Then leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next mysteries to come. The rain was now nearly deafening, pouring relentlessly onto the broken coffin and the drenched shoulders of the onlookers. Midnight, motionless, stood like a monument, amidst the chaos, as if the storm couldn't move him from his place. The creature inside the coffin began to stir more, its movements small but filled with a strange urgency. Every sound it made echoed in everyone's mind like a primal call, something no one could explain, but that sent chills down spines and quickened hearts. Hank suddenly recoiled, falling to his knees on the muddy ground. "This isn't normal. It's not human," he shouted, his voice breaking with fear. He pointed at the creature with trembling fingers. Marianne, hesitant, stepped forward slowly. Every beat of her heart seemed to echo in the heavy silence between the thunderclaps. "Earl always said midnight was special," she murmured, almost like a prayer. "But I never imagined it was something like this." The creature, now fully visible to anyone willing to look, stretched out one of its arms, pointing directly at midnight. Its hand, small and skeletal, trembled like a leaf in the wind. The horse let out another high-pitched whinny and took a step forward, its eyes fixed on the creature. It was as if midnight was responding to a command only he could hear. The two seemed connected in a way that defied any logical explanation, as if they were two parts of an ancient story, waiting to be unraveled. A lightning bolt cut through the sky, illuminating the scene in quick flashes. In that moment, Marianne noticed something that took her breath away. Inside the coffin, next to the creature, was an old photo. She bent down, her hesitant fingers reaching for the wet object. As she lifted the photo, her eyes widened. It was Earl, younger, holding a horse identical to Midnight. But there was something else. Beside him was a woman with striking eyes and An enigmatic smile. In her arms, a child. "My God," Maran whispered, her body trembling. She held the photo up for the others to see, but most of them turned away, afraid to face the mystery unfolding before them. Before she could say anything, Midnight moved closer to the coffin. He lowered his head slowly until his eyes were level with those of the creature. For a moment that felt like an eternity, everything was silent except for the constant sound of the rain. Then, as if guided by an invisible force, Midnight gently touched the creature's face with his muzzle. The silence after Midnight's touch seemed to swallow the entire cemetery. The rain, which had been pouring fiercely, began to soften, turning into a gentle drizzle. The creature, curled up and fragile, took a deep breath as if feeling the air for the first time. Its large, shining eyes met Midnight's, and in that moment, something invisible but undeniable passed between them. It was as if a silent conversation was happening, a dialogue between two souls who had shared a long-lost secret. Marianne, still holding the photo, fell to her knees beside the coffin, unable to look away. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Who was the woman in the picture, and how did the child connect to what was before her now? Her mind drifted back to the nights when Earl, always reserved, would share fragments of stories about his life. He spoke of tough choices and irreplaceable losses, but never of a family. How did we never notice? How did we never ask? Maran thought, feeling a sharp pang of guilt pierce her chest. On the other side of the coffin, Hank tried to find his courage. He grabbed a shovel for support and murmured to himself, "This isn't natural. This shouldn't be happening." But as he looked at Midnight, a strange weight settled on his heart. The horse seemed more human than many of the people there. It wasn't just a pet. There was something about it that transcended common understanding, something that felt directly tied to the mystery they were literally digging up. A distant thunder interrupted Hank's thoughts. Suddenly, the creature raised its arms toward Maran. She instinctively stepped back, but Midnight whinnied softly, as if to say it was okay. Taking a deep breath, Maran placed the photo on the ground and reached out her trembling hand. When her fingers touched the creature's cold, fragile skin, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her body: sadness, pain, and love. It was as if everything Earl had felt in his life was being transferred to her in that moment. Before she could process what was happening, the creature turned its face toward the sky. A low sound, almost like a song, came from its throat, echoing through the cemetery. Midnight immediately joined in, whinnying in harmony. It was more than just a sound. It was a call, a warning, or perhaps a farewell. The rain stopped completely, and the air grew heavy as if something was about to happen. Maran looked at the creature and whispered, almost unknowingly, "Who are you?" The silence that followed seemed to carry the answer no one dared to give. The atmosphere in the cemetery grew unnervingly heavy. Maran felt a chill run down her spine as her eyes fixed on the creature, which now seemed more alive, more aware. Midnight stood by the coffin, his eyes glowing like torches in the dark, as if guarding something more precious than his own life. No one dared speak, but the questions were written on everyone's faces. Who was this creature? What had Earl been hiding from everyone for all these years? Suddenly, a faint murmur came from one of the older people present. Mrs. Eleanor, who was standing with her cane, said, "This reminds me of a story I heard when I was a child." Her hoarse voice was almost swallowed by the wind. All eyes turned to her. Earl was young at the time. They used to say he had a great love. But something terrible happened. The woman disappeared, and Earl was never the same again. I always thought it was just a gossip story, but now Eleanor paused, her mind trying to piece together memories of a distant past. Maran, still kneeling, felt a coldness rising up her. Hands, she held the photo again, staring at the woman in it. The similarities with the creature were subtle, but they were there in the eyes, in the fragility of the features. The realization began to settle in. Earl had lost more than just love. He had lost something no one could have imagined. The creature was not a stranger. It was part of his story, his pain, and his deepest secrets. Before anyone could ask more questions, Midnight let out a loud, nervous neigh, as if trying to silence the speculations. He started circling the coffin, his hooves striking the wet, ground as if drawing something in the mud. Moran watched, hypnotized. Then, as if guided by an invisible force, Midnight stopped in front of a nearby gravestone. He lowered his head and lightly tapped his hoof against it, drawing the attention of everyone. Hank was the first to approach the gravestone, rubbing away the moss that covered the inscription. When the words finally appeared, he gasped, "Lillian Thompson." He read aloud, struggling, 1927 to 1954. Beloved wife and mother. A murmur of shock rippled through the group. Earl had a wife, and she had been buried there all along, just a few feet away from where he would rest. What had he been hiding all these years? What had happened to her? And more importantly, how was that creature in the coffin connected to all of this? The answers were closer than ever, but also more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The words engraved on Lillian Thompson's gravestone seemed to echo in the silent cemetery. Beloved wife and mother. No one could fully process the revelation. That Earl, the solitary man the town believed had no family, had lost not only a wife but also someone he could call a son. Moran tightened her grip on the photo, feeling the emotional weight of that secret. Meanwhile, Midnight stood still before the gravestone, motionless like a sentinel, his gaze fixed on the cold stone. The silence was broken by Eleanor's trembling voice. "Earl never spoke of her, but I remember the funeral," she said as everyone turned to look at her. It was quiet, like this one. There were rumors that Lillian died in childbirth, but no one saw the baby. They said it didn't survive. Earl locked himself in the cabin and was never the same. And that horse, Midnight, came soon after. He said it was a gift from someone special, but never explained who. The old woman looked at the creature in the coffin, her eyes filled with fear and pity. Could the baby have survived? Moran couldn't hold back the tears. It was as if all the pieces of a macabre puzzle were falling into place. But the final image was still a mystery. She knelt beside the coffin and stared at the creature again. "You are his son," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The small being blinked its large, bright eyes, reflecting an inexplicable understanding. Suddenly, it lifted one of its thin hands and pointed directly at Lillian's gravestone. Moran's heart seemed to stop for a moment. It was as if the creature was saying, "Yes." Midnight let out a deep neigh, as if confirming the connection. Hank, who had been standing on the sidelines until then, took a hesitant step forward. He was a practical man who never believed in superstitions or fantastic stories. But now he couldn't ignore what was before him. If the baby survived, why didn't Earl ever tell us? Why has he kept it hidden all this time? His question hung in the air like distant thunder, unanswered. As everyone pondered, a muffled sound began emanating from Lillian's gravestone. A low noise almost imperceptible that gradually grew louder. Midnight moved even closer to the stone, stamping his hooves against the ground as if trying to get attention. The drizzle began to fall again, and the air grew colder. The sound seemed to be coming from deep within the earth, like a call buried for decades, waiting to be heard. The people recoiled in panic, except for Moran, who couldn't take her eyes off the gravestone. "Something is buried here besides her," she said, almost breathless, and then a thin crack began to form in the stone, as if the past was finally trying to break free. What do you think Earl was hiding about Lillian's baby? Share your thoughts in the comments. What do Midnight and the crack in the gravestone mean? Comment on your theories. The sound of the crack in the gravestone was like a silent scream that reverberated through the entire cemetery. The light drizzle turned into a cold wind that whipped through the trees around, as if nature itself could feel the tension of the moment. Midnight, with his hooves firmly on the ground and ears pinned back, didn't move away from the cracked stone. He let out a deep, prolonged neigh, as if calling something only he understood. Moran, still kneeling next to the coffin, couldn't tear her eyes away. The crack widened, and a terrifying silence fell over everyone. Suddenly, a loud snap cut through the air, and the gravestone split in half with a dry sound. A collective gasp of horror and surprise escaped from the lips of those present. The earth beneath the gravestone began to move slowly, as if something was forcing its way up. Hank stepped back, his eyes wide with pure terror. "This isn't possible. This can't be happening, he muttered, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. Maran stood up, her knees trembling, but her determination was stronger than the fear. If Earl kept this secret for so long, there must be a reason for it, she said. Her voice firm though her heart was racing. The creature in the coffin began to make a low sound, almost like a moan. Midnight responded with another neigh, this time softer, almost comforting. The two seemed in sync, as if they were waiting for the same moment. The earth beneath the gravestone finally gave way, revealing something that made everyone hold their breath. A small wooden chest, corroded by time and moisture, slowly emerged from the ground. Midnight immediately approached, lowering his head and sniffing the box as if he recognized its scent. Maran, with trembling hands, knelt again and began digging around the chest. When she finally pulled it out, she felt the symbolic weight of what she was holding. The chest was small, but it seemed to contain something much bigger than its size suggested. With all eyes on her, Maran took a deep breath and opened the chest. Inside was a collection of carefully organized items: an old diary, a faded baby blanket, and a small silver pendant with a name engraved: Ethan. Maran felt a pang in her chest as she read the name, Ethan, the son everyone thought had died along with Lillian. Tears began to roll down her face as she picked up the diary. As she opened the first page, Earl's steady handwriting seemed to whisper from beyond, "For Ethan, when the time is right." Maran held the diary with trembling hands as the cold wind blew around her, as if the cemetery itself were listening to what was about to unfold. The small name engraved on the pendant, Ethan, seemed to echo in her mind, an incomplete answer to all the secrets hanging over that family. Midnight, standing beside her, watched every movement closely, as if keeping the moment with an almost human reverence. The creature in the coffin settled in silence, its bright eyes fixed on the diary, as if it, too, knew that this object held the answers. "I'll read," Maran announced, her voice steady despite the clear tension. The first words on the opening page were like an arrow straight to the heart. "Ethan, my son, if you ever find this diary, know that everything I did was for you and your mother. Forgive me for not being strong enough to face the truth." She paused, swallowing the lump that formed in her throat. The people around her didn't dare interrupt. The silence was broken only by the sound of the wind and Midnight's soft whinny. As if encouraging Maran to continue. The next pages told a heartbreaking story. Earl described the early years with Lillian, a love that defied everything. But happiness was interrupted when Lillian became pregnant with Ethan and fell ill soon after. "The doctor said there was no hope," Earl wrote, "but I refused to believe it. I did what any desperate man would do. I sought help where no one else dared." The diary mentioned an unknown healer, someone Earl had found at the edge of the forest. He promised to save Lillian and Ethan, but the price would be high. I didn't know what I was doing. The healer said that Midnight would be the guardian, that he would understand what no man could. I accepted without question, only hoping to save my family. But when Ethan was born, something was wrong. He was different. He couldn't live in the world like the others. The healer came back, saying that Ethan should be kept a secret, protected. Lillian couldn't bear to see him like that. She left, and I stayed to take care of our son alone. Maran closed the diary, tears streaming down her face. The weight of Earl's sacrifice was overwhelming. Midnight, the horse everyone saw as just an animal, was the link between Ethan and the outside world, the guardian the healer had prophesied. "Ethan never died," Maran said, her voice faltering. "Earl hid him. He protected him. Midnight was the only family he had." The creature in the coffin seemed to understand every word. Its gaze, now fixed on Midnight, held an almost human expression of gratitude. But what Earl hadn't explained yet was what everyone wanted to know. Why now? Why was Ethan there at his father's funeral? Maran carefully closed the journal, feeling the weight of each word from Earl as if they were her own. Beside her, Midnight seemed almost proud, as if the secret he had carried for so many years was finally being set free. But the silence that followed was as thick as the fog around them. Everyone in the cemetery was staring at the creature in the coffin, Ethan. He was the center of a mystery that was now becoming clearer, yet at the same time more perplexing. Why had Earl chosen to reveal everything at that moment, and what would happen now? Before Moran could open the journal again, a strange sound echoed through the cemetery. It was low, like the rustling of leaves, but it came from the direction of the coffin. The creature, Ethan, was moving. More slowly, he rose to sit up, propping himself up with his thin, fragile arms. His eyes searched for Midnight, who immediately stepped forward, tilting his head as if waiting for a command. Then Ethan raised one hand and pointed directly at the journal. It was as if he were asking Moran to continue. Swallowing hard, she opened the journal again, turning the pages carefully. Near the end, she found something that made her gasp. It was a final message from Earl, written in shaky handwriting, as if he knew he was writing his last words. If you're reading this, it means my time has come. Midnight will know what to do. Ethan deserves to see the world, but he'll need someone who understands his heart. Please take care of him, just as you took care of me. He is my legacy. Moran felt a tightness in her chest as she read those words. The responsibility that Earl had entrusted to those present was overwhelming. She looked around, seeing the mix of expressions on people's faces. Some looked terrified, others deeply moved, but everyone understood the importance of this moment. Ethan wasn't just Earl's son. He was a symbol of sacrifice, unconditional love, and the fight to protect what mattered most. Midnight, for his part, softly neighed, as if confirming the words in the diary. Without warning, Ethan reached out his arms toward Moran, like a child seeking comfort. Instinctively, she lifted him into her arms. Though his body was light and small, she felt a strange strength emanating from him, as if he carried a lifetime of stories and silent suffering. Midnight approached, resting his muzzle on her shoulder, as if to say she wasn't alone. The rain began to fall again, but this time it seemed lighter, almost purifying. As everyone watched, Moran knew deep in her heart that this was the moment Earl had waited his whole life for. Ethan was ready to begin a new chapter. Moran felt the fragility of Ethan's body in her arms as Midnight's steady footsteps echoed through the cemetery. The rain now fell in soft drops, turning the earth around them into a mirror that reflected the faint glow of the moon. The people, still in shock from the revelations, stood motionless, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and reverence. Midnight seemed to lead the moment, walking slowly out of the cemetery as if signaling that the time for questions had passed, and it was time to act. As she walked, Moran could hear the murmurs around her. "What will we do with him?" asked a man with a trembling voice. "Is it safe to let him live among us?" Old Eleanor raised her voice, her deep tone echoing like distant thunder. "Ethan is not a monster. Earl sacrificed everything to protect him. It is our duty to honor that." Her words carried an ancient wisdom that momentarily calmed the crowd, but the weight of Ethan's future still hung over everyone. Moran looked at Midnight, whose eyes conveyed a quiet determination. The horse was more than a guardian. He was a link between two worlds, a bridge between the human and the inexplicable. Ethan, in turn, seemed increasingly aware. He lifted his head and looked at Moran, his eyes filled with something she could only describe as trust. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her, as if Earl were standing beside her, holding her hand and telling her she was on the right path. As they reached the entrance of the cemetery, Moran stopped and turned to the group. "Earl entrusted this to us. He knew that one day Ethan would need to be accepted, not hidden. And maybe that's why Midnight brought him here. We can't leave him alone now." Her words were met with silence, but the looks began to change. It wasn't easy to accept the unknown, but the small, fragile figure in Moran's arms didn't seem threatening. In fact, he was a symbol of what everyone feared to face. The weight of protecting the vulnerable. The wind carried with it a low sound, almost like a whisper. Midnight softly neighed, as if to reinforce Moran's words. Ethan reached out one of his hands toward the group, a gesture that could be interpreted as a request or as a thank you. Moran felt a warm tear run down her face. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but there was an unwavering certainty in her heart. Ethan had a chance to find a place in the world, and that place would start with her. The walk back along the muddy trail was marked by a heavy silence. Moran, holding Ethan in her arms, felt the weight not only of the small body, but also of the responsibility now resting on her. Midnight walked beside her, his step steady and his gaze watchful, like a silent protector. The others followed at a distance, as if they needed time to process what they had just witnessed. Despite the light, rain, the air was thick with anticipation, as if fate itself was waiting for the decision that was about to be made. When they reached the entrance of the small cabin where Earl had lived for so many years, Maran hesitated. The old wood seemed more worn than ever, as if it had absorbed decades of secrets and pain. Midnight stopped beside her, giving a low whinny, almost as if to encourage her. She took a deep breath and crossed the threshold. Inside, the familiar smell of damp wood and dried herbs surrounded her, bringing memories of Earl, his rough laugh, and his incomplete stories. Now it was up to her to finish the narrative. Maran placed Ethan on an old armchair, adjusting the blanket that covered him. Her eyes were fixed on him, searching for answers that the little being might not be able to provide. Midnight stood next to the chair like a watchful shadow. People began to enter one by one, filling the cramped space with uneasy silence. Finally, Hank, always the most pragmatic, broke the silence. "If Earl trusted him, then I think we can too. But we need to know how to take care of him." His voice was deep, but not hostile. It was a start. Eleanor, with her cane creaking on the floor, took a step forward. "That journal you found, Maran. Maybe there are more answers in there." Earl knew what he was doing. All of this was planned for years. "I don't believe he would have left Ethan helpless." Maran nodded, picking up the journal once again. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the yellowed pages. Among the text she'd already read, she found a section marked with a red ribbon. Opening it, she discovered detailed instructions on how Ethan should be cared for, as if Earl had prepared for this moment from the very beginning. Earl's words were clear and moving. "Ethan needs more than protection. He needs acceptance. Teach him to trust. Show him what it means to be loved. Midnight will be his guide, but he will need a family. If you're reading this, I know you are capable of giving him what I never could." Maran closed the journal, her heart heavy. She looked at Ethan, who now seemed relaxed, then at the people around her. "He's not just my responsibility. He's all of ours. Let's honor Earl's sacrifice. Let's give Ethan the life he deserves." The cabin fell silent for a moment before a murmur of agreement spread. And in that instant, Maran knew that Ethan's future wouldn't be easy, but he would no longer be alone. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who love emotional stories. Your support helps us bring more content like this. See you next time.